All right. Welcome, everyone. It is August already, and we have not a huge lineup of security vulnerabilities as much this month, or some of the operational challenges that we talked through last month, but there is kind of a broad set of updates this month from Microsoft for us to cover. There's a bit of kind of broader news that we'll cover, some other vulnerabilities and trends that are going on that we'll talk about a little bit here. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, if you're not familiar with the On24 platform, you're going to see a few windows in your screen there. One will be the slide deck. As we get into a few things here, I am going to be sharing my my browser for a little while to go through some of the articles that we're going to talk about. As we do that, you have the ability to resize your windows. So resizing, when we switch over to the shared screen, you can enlarge that until we're done with that and then go back over to the slides. The slides will be less important while we do that. Many of you like to get links and access to the information that we're covering here. In another tray within On24, you'll see the PDF version of today's presentation. So go ahead and grab that. If you need to get access to any of the links, they're all going to be in the slides there, and you should be able to get access to them very quickly that way. The slides and the on-demand webinar will be available after we're complete here today. But for those of you who need this information to go straight into your change control or testing processes, that's where you can get access to it right now. All right, so we're going to go through and talk about what released on Patch Tuesday, some of the news lineup, like I mentioned, some big things that are going on that you may need to be aware of. And then we're going to hand over to Todd, and he's going to walk us through the bulletins, what released, what you need to know. And then I'll wrap up today with the between the Patch Tuesdays. That's talking about all the other things that came out since the last Patch Tuesday. This will include our Mac OS or our Mac support update and a number of other third parties that have come out recently. All right. So just a quick high level. Yesterday, Microsoft released 14 updates across their different OS and application stack. We're going to cover those. 8 of those were rated as critical, 6 as important. Adobe also had a lineup of 4, one of which was Adobe Acrobat and Reader. That's the one we're going to cover today. They did have a few others. There's a Toolkit SDK and a few other less common apps that they did release as well. Those were priority 3s and only had a couple of vulnerabilities resolved in them. But the Acrobat and Reader is the one we're going to touch on here today. First, though, we're going to get into a little bit of what is the latest from a news perspective that you might need to be concerned about. There was a couple of 0 days that were patched by Apple. We're going to talk about the broader Apple updates that came out I believe it was around July 19th that the 0 days came up, and then the Office updates came up after that event. So the first link here, and again, if you resize your screens as we go into this, you're going to see that I'm going to be sharing my browser window here. You can now resize your screens to see that. The first article is talking about those 2 CVEs that were actively being targeted. So this is covering both the Mac OS and iOS devices. There is a kernel vulnerability and a vulnerability in WebKit. So the first one is CVE 2022-32894. It's a flaw in the kernel of the Mac OS or the Mac OS and iOS devices. So that's the first one there. And the second one is the WebKit, which is CVE 2022-32893. Wait a second. Why is this coming up? Well, threat post is really pulling a number on me here today. It looks like, okay, ignore that. I pulled up threat post this morning to go and look for the latest articles, but now I'm looking at this and seeing 2022 dates, and that is from last year, apparently. So ignore that first article. Hopefully they didn't do this. Yeah, everything else was 2023. I have no idea why threat post put a 2022 article in the top of their news. That's just weird. I didn't look closely enough at that this morning. The other thing, and why I thought that was fairly recent, was there is a surge in Apple targeted attacks going on. So this one was from Dark Reading. Since 2019, they've seen a trend in kind of continued focus on the Mac OS and iOS devices. So this one is just kind of warning about some of the trends they're seeing. The Accenture released a report basically talking about this, and some other people are saying ThreatPost is not updating very effectively anymore. So word to the wise for me, I will be avoiding them in the future because that really just threw me off. All right. So if you are running a lot of Mac and iOS devices in your environment, you might want to take a look at some of the trends there. Ransomware actors, zero-day vulnerabilities, and a number of other activities are targeting the Mac OS platform. So this is more of just a general kind of update. We're going to show you the Mac OS updates that came out this last month towards the end here. So we'll cover that in detail. But this is just kind of alluding to the fact that there's a number of recent trends towards targeting the Mac OS and iOS platforms. So Lockbit, let's see, this one was the IDC report as well. So there's a couple of different reports there. Again, if you have perceptions within your organization that Mac OS and iOS devices are less of a security concern, this is just trying to drive awareness around that. And we're going to bring up the Mac OS and third-party updates that apply to the Apple platform towards the end here. The next article is Citrix had a 0-day that they are basically guiding customers to update as quickly as possible. Right now, they're as of August 8th, they were reportedly at 7,000 instances still remaining exposed. 460 of those were confirmed to be compromised. So this is in Citrix networking products, the NetScaler ADC and NetScaler Gateway. If you are running either of those types of devices within your organization, take a look at this article, CVE 2023-3519, and a published patch are available for that vulnerability. Since the patch was released, researchers have been able to demonstrate how the vulnerability can be exploited. With that demonstration, definitely comes a lot of more awareness amongst the threat actor community as well. Again, 460 confirmed compromises already. They're carrying out dozens of exploits already. So the details of the patch from Citrix, you can link to that in the article here. That provides you the version information for the devices that are vulnerable and guidance on how to update those. So make sure if you're running any of those Citrix devices that you take a look at that article and make sure that you're getting those resolved. The next article here is talking about ransomware trends. Right now, there is a rather large spike. We've seen a number of different attacks from the CLOP Move It campaign, the Go Anywhere campaign. This is talking about an article or a bit of research that was released by Akamai. There's probably 4 or 5 different research firms or vendors that have released ransomware trends that are going on right now in the past couple of weeks here. So you can actually find a few other varieties of those right now. But it's talking about a number of the vulnerabilities that are being targeted right now. If, again, most of you, if you've got these devices or pieces of software in your environment, are probably already responding to this, but it's just making sure that you're aware of and, staying on top of some of these attacks. Move It, Go Anywhere. Those were 2 of the big recent ones. There's Papercut is a fairly new one. There's another one using a combination of Meta or Facebook and Salesforce. some phishing attempts that are getting in through vulnerabilities there. So a variety of different attacks that are going on right now. There's definitely kind of a rise in ransomware attacks at the moment. If you read the blog post that we released yesterday, I went in and talked about some of the trends around that. If you keep up with CISA's KEV list, they're continuing to add more vulnerabilities on there, but there's still a very big gap between what CISA is tracking and what a broader risk-based vulnerability management platform can kind of show you. So I went through and analyzed the trending and ransomware tied vulnerabilities that our platform is tracking, compared that to the CISA KEV list, and tried to give a representation of, if you're trying to do, if you're doing traditional, vulnerability management yet, even with the release of CVSS 4.0 that's going to be coming out here, you're still blind to a lot of the real world risk and what you should be focusing on. With something like the CISA KEV list, and for those of you in Europe, the NIS2 is going to be releasing a similar list that is, trying to do the same thing that CISA KEV is doing. But even with those, you're going to have a gap in, what's trending and what's actively being targeted out there. So that's kind of one of the things that I wanted to outline was even with utilizing some of those more free available services, you're still not quite getting the coverage that you need to keep up with the threats out there. So if you're interested in some of that additional reading, Akamai is the one that's being talked about in here. They've got a pretty good report that just came out covering the 90 kind of more common ransomware groups that are seen right now and some of the trends that they're doing and a lot of the recent attacks. All right, that is the news lineup. The next update that I wanted to provide is on those of you running the Ivanti Endpoint Manager Mobile Core product. Many of you, if you're running this, would have already been notified of some vulnerabilities. There were a couple of those that were being actively targeted. We've been actively communicating with our customers to make sure they're aware of and responding to these. There is a third vulnerability that was also discovered here that we had a coordinated disclosure. The vulnerability is not being actively exploited, but a researcher did find it. And unfortunately, that researcher, as soon as we agreed on a date that we were going to do the disclosure, they decided to release their proof of concept. So this is publicly disclosed. We're urging those of you running on Endpoint Manager Mobile to also go in and make sure that not only are you up to the latest version, if you've applied the update for CVE 2023-35081, if you've provided made the updates to get up to speed on this, you've taken care of both 7.8 and 8.1. 8.2, the new vulnerability, there's a link to the community article on this. There's an additional RPM script that you need to run to basically get this updated. So that is, once you're up to the latest version, you've taken care of 78 and 81. And then if you go to this knowledge base article here, that is going to walk you through how to apply the RPM script to do the cleanup required to resolve 82. So these are the steps to take to make sure that you've covered everything here. We've been, again, most of you should have been getting direct communications from us through our community, through direct contact from us. If you know you've got Endpoint Manager Mobile running in your environment, this is just another way for us to make sure to do some additional outreach to make sure everybody's covered. Again, that third vulnerability is not being targeted. This is just a notification that it has been publicly disclosed. Those of you who have been on our Patch Tuesday webinar before, whenever we have a public disclosure from any vendor, we recommend that, it's statistically, it puts you at higher risk. So take additional steps if necessary to make sure to get that resolved. And that one is just a script that needs to be run after you've updated to the latest. So moving on to Microsoft's updates. We've got a couple of updates that we're going to talk about specifically here into a little bit more detail. The first one is a vulnerability that was released in July. Now, we talked about this last month. This originally released with OS and Office being affected products here. Microsoft did not re-release anything for this particular vulnerability this month. What they've done is they split Office out. Office is not actually vulnerable to CVE 2023-36884, but its functionality was able to be utilized in an attack chain to exploit 36884, which was in the OS. So that attack chain is what they're providing a fix for in the Office update that they released last month as well. What they're splitting it out as right now is purely just more of a documentation level. They've created this advisory 230003 that is outlining that Office was not vulnerable, but as a defense in depth measure, they still recommend applying the update from last month to make sure that Office can't be used to chain an attack to take advantage of 36884, and very likely, any future vulnerabilities that could be exploited in that same type of chaining tactic. Their guidance here was pretty clear. If you've applied, July's or August's OS updates, and you've applied the latest Office updates, you should be fully resolved, and CVE 2023-36884 is no longer exposed. So that's the only change there to that one that released from July. The new vulnerability that was released this month that is confirmed to be exploited is CVE 2023-38180. This is a vulnerability in .NET and Visual Studio. It's a denial of service vulnerability. Rated as important, has a 7.5 CVSS v3 score, but again, actively being exploited. So our guidance is, ignore that important severity in the CVSS score, treat it as a higher priority because it is actively being exploited. It affects .NET 6.0, .NET 7.0, ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core 2.1, and Visual Studio 2022 versions. The vulnerability is, again, confirmed to be actively exploited, and they've basically put the status of code maturity for this to proof of concept. So, basically they've got practical demonstrations that they can reproduce this attack. Complexity is pretty low. So other threat actors could absolutely look to take advantage of this as well. If they haven't already gotten a sample or gotten it off the shelf, it would not be too difficult for them to reverse engineer to exploit that. So again, your development organization is probably the group that may have to update these components. Make sure that they're getting on this one because it is actively being targeted. Getting into some of the advisories for this month. The first one is Microsoft's guidance for enabling LDAP channel binding and LDAP signing. So Microsoft has some documentation here. If you're using LDAP, they are recommending to turn on these additional capabilities to provide ways to increase security of communications between LDAP and Active Directory. So take a look at advisory 190023. Basically, it shows you how to set that up correctly to make sure that you're requiring signing for those communications, and then on the domain controller, setting up the channel binding token. The second advisory is another guidance on Microsoft signed drivers being used maliciously. So we've talked about this one a couple of times this year. There is, it was updated on August 8th. They've basically updated the revocation list. So take a look at this article if you did not see this last month or previously. basically there were some accounts that were some developer accounts, partner developer accounts that were compromised and were being used to try to maliciously sign drivers to distribute and do bad things. So Microsoft has shut down those accounts. They've identified the drivers that were improperly signed, and they've basically updated their revocation lists to make sure that any usage of that will be denied. So the Windows driver.stl revocation list is what they've updated once again. They probably just found a few more out there. For details on that, you can go to Microsoft's help article about that. If you're running Defender, Defender should automatically update to update that Defender list with the latest definitions. But if you're not running Defender, making sure that you've got that driver STL revocation list updated is their guidance. The Office Defense in Depth update. So we talked about the CVE from July. This is the advisory that they split off from there. Again, if you already deployed last month's Office updates, then this is more informational. But basically, this was stating that Office was not technically vulnerable, but was used to basically instigate the attack chain to take advantage of 36884. If you've not already applied the Office updates from last month, they're suggesting that applying the Office updates discussed in the advisory along with Windows updates from August 2023, or if you've got the July one in place that resolved 36884, the combination of those two things will completely protect you from CVE 2023 36884. So this one is more just informational. They split these two things out. The Office editions that were affected are all listed down here. They're no longer in the CVE. They're just in this advisory. The CVE now only covers the OS updates that were released last month. So that is the update on the Office Defense in Depth. And then there's another advisory here for Memory Integrity Systems Readiness Scan Tool, Defense in Depth update. It's kind of a mouthful. It's used to check for compatibility issues with memory integrity, also known as Hypervisor Protected Code Integrity, HVCI. The original version was published without an RSRC section, which contains resource information for a module. The new version addresses this issue. So if you know that you're using this tool, they're making sure that people are aware of this, updating to the latest, and using that. That way it's a better secure module that you're using. So if you're using that readiness tool, make sure to go and get the latest version of it so that you're making sure to run a secure version of that. All right, that is it for the advisories, news, and exploited CVEs. So now if you go back over and resize your screen up to the slide deck, we'll just go through a couple of other updates here. There were some servicing stack updates for August. Windows Server 2012 and Server 2012 R2 had a servicing stack update this month. And there's a number of updates that did impact developer tools. We talked about Visual Studio and .NET and ASP.NET already, but there were also some CVEs that affected Azure as well. So your Azure teams, your IT ops teams may have some updates to do or some configuration to change for a few of those specific vulnerabilities there. Server 2012 R2, the end of life is coming. October is rapidly approaching. That's the last public security update for Server 2012 and 2012 R2. If you know you're continuing to support or having to run 2012 for longer than October, make sure that you're investigating either how to better lock down and secure those devices, or that you're going to be continuing ESU support with Microsoft for 1 to 3 years out here going forward. If you are continuing with that platform and you've agreed to Microsoft's ESU support, do know that for those of you running on Ivanti security controls, endpoint manager, or neurons for patch management, you can also subscribe to get the Server 2012 support through our platform. So most of you who have done that for Windows 7 or Server 2008 know how that process works. The team or the SKUs and everything are ready for that, so you can subscribe to that feed if that's something you need to do. On the lifecycle awareness, the next event we've got coming up is 21H2. We're a couple of months out from that having to be a problem, but as you're winding down, just make sure that you've got visibility around any devices that are still running Windows 11 Home or Pro 21H2. You have a couple more months here before that final version is, or that final update will be going out on 10/10/2023. Just make sure that you've got devices moving forward so that they're not vulnerable. And for those who may not be aware, you can subscribe to content announcements if you're on any of our products. Out on our community, there is a forum page that allows you to subscribe for the feed that relates to the products that you're supporting. So on that note, Todd, handing over to you.
All right, Chris,
go ahead and walk us through the bulletins.
You bet. Hello, everyone, and welcome to August Patch Tuesday. Let's walk through the important bulletins that came out this month, mostly from Microsoft, but we'll take a quick look here at Acrobat and Reader. It's been a long time since they've done a full security update. I think the last one came out back in April. So as you can see, they've addressed a lot of vulnerabilities this month. There were 30, 16 of which were rated critical. So definitely a large string of vulnerabilities that they've been kind of sitting on for a while. Be aware of that if most people are running at least Reader in their environment. So make sure that you address that. Releases did come out for both their continuous model as well as the classic 2020 that's been around for quite a while now. Moving into the Microsoft updates, we have Windows 11, of course, this month. After a huge number of vulnerabilities addressed last month, as Chris said, they dropped down a little bit. There were only 33 addressed this month. Chris talked in quite a bit of detail about the 36884 vulnerability. That's known, exploited, and publicly disclosed. Again, just an informational update this month, breaking apart the OS as well as the Office updates. But did call it out here, and you'll see it called out on a lot of these slides. No known issues for Windows 11. This provisioning issue has been around for the second release, the 22H2, basically since they released it last year. So not a lot of progress on this one, probably be around forever. We're just carrying it forward every month. But good thing is that's the only really known issue with Windows 11. We did get an update, of course, for Windows 10 again this month. Still quite a few versions that are running out there, as we've listed here. Keep in mind that the server versions from 2016 through 2022 are also running the same kernel as the workstation versions. So that's why all these are lumped together into the same updates. Again, same thing, 33 vulnerabilities addressed this month for Windows 10. This issue's been around for a long, long time, still carrying it forward on Windows 10 around the cluster services. Basically, they will restart kind of on their own after a certain amount of time, but you can go in and manually restart them if you need a faster restart. It's more of a kind of an annoyance than a long-term problem. They still haven't resolved the issue with ESXi and Server 2022. This one's been carried forward now for at least, I think, about 5 months. Hopefully we can get this resolved pretty soon, but they're working together with VMware on this one. And again, has to do with the way the secure boot is enabled and its interaction with Server 2022. We did get an update, of course, for Server 2012. Chris did mention that it's rapidly approaching its end of life here in October. After, I think, 60-some vulnerabilities last month, they addressed 24 this month. Again, make sure that if you're running this, there is both a monthly roll-up as well as a security-only version for Server 2012. Unlike Windows 10 and 11, which are cumulative, meaning that each month that they release an update, it includes all the updates since the latest major version release. On the older versions, like Server 2012, for example, you have the option to just apply the monthly roll-ups, which actually includes everything going back to October of 2016, long, long time. But the security-only updates are just those vulnerabilities, in this case, 24 this month. So if you have systems that are sensitive to updates, you can apply the security-only updates, which is a much smaller update and includes just these 24 fixes for these vulnerabilities. And the difference is, obviously, if you're doing security-only updates, you need to make sure that you apply them religiously every month to make sure that you have all the vulnerabilities addressed. As I said, we had the Server 2012. We also have the Server 2012 R2. One additional vulnerability, there were 25 addressed this month. Keep in mind that the Server 2012 R2 is also the basis for Windows 8.1 desktop version, but Windows 8.1 was announced end of support in January of 2023. Not a very popular desktop operating system, so Microsoft decided not to carry it forward. They're not going to be providing any ESU support for it either. So if you're using that, make sure you get off of that right away and update to something more modern. Again, we had the monthly roll-up. We also have the security-only updates this month for Server 2012 R2. Moving on to the Office side, they did address 8 vulnerabilities in the online versions of the Office apps. This includes Microsoft 365, Office 2019, and the Office Long-Term Service Channel 2021. 8 different vulnerabilities addressed this month. As Chris went into quite a bit of detail on the advisory 230003, take a look at that. It does talk about the defense in depth, and make sure that you update the latest Office updates to apply them. They are rated critical this month. On the regular side, the on-premise versions of Microsoft Office, you can see basically everything in the Office suite has been updated this month. All the way from Excel through Visio and Word, Office Online Server, and the Mac versions have also been updated this month as well. 6 vulnerabilities addressed, again, in that advisory 23003 still applies as well. Good news is that there's no known exploited vulnerabilities there. There was a security update for Internet Explorer this month. This applies basically to the Server 2012 R2 updates. It's included and bundled in there. You don't need to worry about it if you're applying the monthly rollups, but there was a standalone update for Internet Explorer 11. SharePoint Server also got its usual monthly update. 4 vulnerabilities addressed this month. None of these are publicly disclosed or known exploited. That's the reason it's only rated as important. But if you're running any of these versions from the subscription edition, Server 2016 or Server 2019, you should include it in your list of updates, maybe on a secondary pass as you do your updates this month. There was another update for Security Exchange Server this month. It applies to 2016 CU23 and the latest versions of 2019, which are the cumulative updates versions 11 and 12. 6 vulnerabilities addressed this month, dealing with remote code execution, spoofing, and elevation of privileges. They did report a known issue. I captured it down here on the bottom, basically saying that after this update is installed, web page previews for URLs that are shared in Outlook on the web are not rendered correctly. Okay, they did say that they're working on a workaround fix for this. They didn't say specifically what it is just yet, but just be aware of that issue. We also saw a SQL Server update this month. They addressed one single vulnerability. Talked about it a little bit here. I captured it up in the description, having to do with a server receiving a malicious network packet can possibly cause problems in your environment. Again, rated important. Nothing here is publicly disclosed or no known exploits. But if you are running SQL Server, again, just like the other ones, if you're running through these important updates on a secondary pass, make sure you get them implemented in your environment. We did see the .NET updates, the .NET Framework updates this month, addressed 2 different vulnerabilities dealing with spoofing and elevation of privileges. If you are running these in your environment, you want to make sure you update them. Again, they're rated important, but generally most people want to do the .NET Framework updates in conjunction with the operating system updates. So just be aware that there are 2 vulnerabilities this month that you should run through. Like the operating system updates where I talked about the monthly rollup and the security only, Microsoft offers the .NET Framework updates. Again, this is from 2.0 all the way through 4.8.1 in the form of both monthly rollup and security only updates. Again, the same 2 vulnerabilities in both cases, but the monthly rollup does include a whole bunch of vulnerabilities addressed going back to 2016 when they started the monthly rollup program. with that, Chris is going to talk a little bit about what happened between the Patch Tuesdays, and there was a real lot of activity this month.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. All right. So this is the part where we cover all of the other updates that typically slip through the cracks or may, hide from you, depending on where you're getting all your update information. A lot of the vendors out there operate on more of a continuous release cycle. So Microsoft and a few others have standardized on more of a regular release cadence. Most of these vendors are, especially vendors like a Google, Mozilla, as soon as they've got an update available, they're going to release it. Google, it's almost once a week that they're doing Google release or Chrome releases. Mozilla, expect probably 1 to 2 a month at minimum. A lot of the others, depending on what happens, we talked last month, Oracle had their quarterly update, which means Java got updated, and that triggers the domino effect of all of the other Java frameworks getting updated after that. So that's where the lineup of Azul, Corretto, JDK, Nitro, or not Nitro, Red Hat, OpenJDK, and others got updated from that kind of release. So this is kind of going through and talking about all those other updates that happened in between. We will also cover a Mac or Apple version of this as well. So first up, we had multiple Google Chrome releases. The Chrome, the first one of those, 90.99, fixed 11 vulnerabilities. Another release shortly after, 171, that fixed another 11 vulnerabilities. Java, as I mentioned, last month they released their quarterly update, and the JDK was updated to resolve 8 vulnerabilities in the 17 branch. In the 11 branch, they resolved 6. And in the Java 8 branch, they resolved 5 vulnerabilities. From there, you've got all the different frameworks that utilize Java on there. So Azure Zulu, you can see the different branches there that were updated accordingly. There's additional vulnerabilities resolved in theirs in a few cases. Corretto, same thing. It's another JDK variation. So you've got all the Corretto releases after Oracle did their release for .17 or 17, 11, and 8. Red Hat OpenJDK, similar lineup. Firefox, Firefox 116 released, resolving 14 vulnerabilities. Firefox ESR had a couple of branches that updated for 11 and 9 respectively there for the 115 and 102 branches. Nitro Pro and Nitro Pro Enterprise received some updates there, resolving 1 CVE. SeaMonkey resolved 10 vulnerabilities in their latest update, and Thunderbird resolved 2 vulnerabilities. On the Apple side, there were a number of updates. As I mentioned, they did their regular update, and Apple Venture Mac OS, Big Sur, Monterey, Safari, and then third parties from Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Firefox, Firefox ESR, and Thunderbird were all updated. The Mac OS side, they resolved 42 vulnerabilities in the Ventura update. Monterey resolved 93. Big Sur resolved 120. Safari resolved 7. Google Chrome updates, similar to on the Windows side, there were 11 vulnerabilities resolved in the 2 releases that came out there. And then Microsoft Edge resolved 3 vulnerabilities in their Edge for Mac OS. Firefox 116 and their ESR branch 102, both released, resolving 14 and 9 CVEs there. And then Thunderbird resolved 2. So if you, depending on where you're at in your update process, if you have your Mac OS devices just automatically updating as soon as they come out, or if you do those in your regular maintenance, be aware that those devices have a number of vulnerabilities to resolve this month as well. All right, on that note, let's go and see what additional questions that we have that we might want to go over. So Todd, any of the update or questions that came out so far that look like they need to be covered from a broader audience perspective?
There were some questions, Chris, around the URL blocking in not URL blocking, but the network UNC path blocking in Outlook. And there was a I think we were trying to drop a link in that talked more about that from Microsoft here. Let me see if I can pull it up.
Okay. And I think most of the other questions were fairly specific. There was one question from Phil asking, do we know how many customers are using the monthly roll-up versus the security only? So that was an interesting question. I responded directly to Phil about this, but in case any of you, the rest of you are wondering, we don't have specific telemetry, but based on what we can glean from, we do get some telemetry depending on what information we're looking at. If it's cloud-based, we get more than on-prem, obviously. There's cases where, like support cases or questions from customers through conversations that myself, Todd, other PMs of the team are looking into or anything like that. For the most part, many of you are using the monthly roll-ups for the pre-Windows 10 editions of the OS. We do know that there are still people who are using the security only. That tends to happen when exceptions occur. So for the most part, if you've ever been curious, like, hey, is there any benefit to doing one versus the other? The monthly roll-up is typically cleaner and easier, and you basically know exactly where you are at all times. So if you're on the July, you know that you're up to date. Everything's in there up till July. If you're about to deploy August, then everything will be up to the August level. With the security only, there's a little bit more investigation that needs to occur sometimes, but typically that's used when an environment runs into an issue with one of the updates and they need to get very specific and do the security only release track because something else broke functionally in their environment. So that was an interesting question that others might be curious about as well.
Yeah, one thing on that, Chris, back in the early days when Microsoft first introduced the monthly rollups, they actually included a lot of performance enhancements and other functionality in there as well that were not in the security only. So there are some additional advantages to using the monthly rollup if you can.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think our audience is mostly out on vacation this month.
It's been kind of quiet, yeah.
It has been. And fortunately, it was a lower key lineup from Microsoft this month. Couple of things that, just additional notes. If you are one of those environments where you're still running on-prem Exchange, there were, again, 5 vulnerabilities resolved in that. There is talk of some additional steps that had to be taken on the Exchange blog. So thank you for joining us this month.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
All right. Thank you, everyone. That is a wrap for this month. As always, you should definitely subscribe and make sure that you're getting the latest information from us. We're going to do not just the monthly updates, but we'll also be streaming other things like the top questions asked and other great tidbits of information that you're going to want all throughout. So definitely subscribe to our feed, and we'll see you here again next month.
We look forward to seeing you soon.